Hello and welcome to A Deeper Dive with Dara Cam. Today's special guest is Pinellas County Sheriff Bob Gualtieri. He is also an attorney. He also is the chairman of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Commission. This episode is being released 2 days before the 5th anniversary of the horrific mass shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland on February 14th, 2018. Sheriff Gualtieri and I are going to take a deep dive into what we learned from that event, how the state has made students safer and schools safer in the aftermath, and what still needs to be done. Stick with us. You do not want to miss this episode.
Don't forget, and don't let those lives that were lost be for naught.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by City and State, Florida.
Hello and welcome to A Deeper Dive with me, Dara Cam. We have a very, very special guest today, Sheriff Bob Gualtieri, the Pinellas County Sheriff, and you will know why he is so special after we get to talking for a few minutes. Welcome to the show, Sheriff Gualtieri.
Thanks, Dara. Glad to be with you.
We have known each other for quite a while, and we got to know each other a lot better after the horrific mass shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in 2018. And we had booked this a while back and discussed you coming on the show around November. And when I booked you, I did not realize that this episode will be released 2 days before the 5th anniversary of that horrific event. So I wanted to start by digging into what happened that day. What you also are the chairman of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Commission. It's a mouthful. You all have been meeting since 2018. That is one of the items that came out of the regular legislative session that was passed in response to that event where 14 students and 3 faculty members lost their lives. Let me back up and say that one of the most impactful things that I have ever experienced in my life was watching that presentation that you put together, walking through what happened that day, inside and out, using videos from that event. I'm going to tear up because there were people who had to leave the room. It was about a 45-minute presentation. I think at one point I had to leave the room. It was a lot to take in, a lot to absorb. Maybe you can just talk a little bit about what happened that day, what your takeaway was. What I'd like to discuss is what we've learned, how we've adapted, and how much safer, if we are safer today.
Yeah. So I guess to sum it up succinctly, what happened that day was everybody's worst nightmare. It was a horror story that nobody could ever write. And at the end of the day, it was caused by so many failures. It was arguably something that could have been mitigated. I wouldn't go as far to necessarily say that it could have been prevented, but it could have been mitigated. 34 people shot and or killed in 3 minutes and 51 seconds is terrible. And I think we're overall in 2018, where we were was in a bad place regarding school safety. And we collectively, everybody in the state that's responsible for school safety failed the parents and the students as to their expectation. And parents have a right to expect when they send their kids to school in the morning, the kids are coming home safe in the afternoon. And that, at the end of the day, has to be the number one priority. It has to be what we strive for all the time. And what we saw was back then is the schools were not prepared, underprepared, and that school safety wasn't a focus and a priority, which was amazing, really, given the fact that Columbine happened in 1999. And there was too much of a mindset about school safety that it's perfunctory, check the box. It isn't my job. If I heard that one more time from educators, is my job's to teach. No, your job is to make sure that the kids stay safe. That's your number one priority. That has to be your number one priority. So I think that we've made a lot of progress over the last 5 years, but we're not there. And quite honestly, that we'll never be there, and nobody should ever say we're there, because there is no finish line, there is no end zone. We have to continue to strive for improvement, to adapt, and to overcome challenges, and to adapt to what people are doing out there that want to hurt the kids or hurt the school. So we're much better off today, but there's still work to be done, and there's some key areas that work needs to be done in. But it's 5 years. It feels like yesterday in some respects, and it feels like an eternity in others.
Yeah. I was shocked when somebody was asking me about when they mentioned it was 5 years, and it does feel like it was just yesterday. The parents, the student, that created the March for Our Lives, the parents coming up. I was in the governor's office, Governor Scott's office, when he signed that legislation with the parents by his side. I mean, it was a whirlwind. That event happened on February 14th, 2018, and the legislature happened to be in session. So they did a number of things to address what seemed to be shortcomings in the system that, I mean, most of our listeners, I'm sure, are familiar with a number of, you could call it falling through the cracks. I mean, it was a sinkhole that Nicholas Cruz fell through. There were so many signs, so many red flags, so many points at which some system could have or should have intervened, and that never happened. You've all dug into that with your commission. Two things came out of that I wanted to talk about that came out of the law, the Marjory Stoneman Douglas law that was passed. One is the state raised the age from 18 to 21 to purchase long guns. Everybody who doesn't know my pal, Sheriff Gualtieri, the sheriff is also an attorney. So he can, when I ask him about questions about the law, he knows about it from both sides, from a practitioner and as somebody who really understands how it works. So that they raised the age from 18 to 21 because Nicholas Cruz had legally purchased these. I get in trouble when I call them assault weapons. What do we call them? They're
Well, it was, in his case, it was an AR-15.
right.
It's a semi-automatic rifle is what it is, and that's really what it is.
And he used a lot of ammunition. I remember during that presentation you went through, and he had time to reload many times, and he had a bag full of more stuff that he never actually got to, right?
That's right.
So they raised the age from 18 to 21 to purchase long guns. It created a huge furor among the National Rifle Association and gun rights enthusiasts. That law was challenged, and so they challenged not only the raising of the age from 18 to 21 for long guns, they are also challenging a federal and state prohibition against people under 21 having handguns. That is in the appeals court right now. A federal judge in Northern District of Florida upheld the law, The NRA is appealing that. What are your thoughts about that? We have a very conservative 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. Do you think that that law will get upheld, or and do you think that 18-year-olds should be carrying AK-47s and AR-15s?
Well, there's a lot there. So I guess what I'll say, I guess I'll answer the first part. Do I think it'll get upheld? Yes. Is that Second Amendment rights are extremely important, but they are no more or less important than any other constitutional protections or constitutional rights. And there isn't a single constitutional right that is an unbridled right. You can have reasonable restrictions, and I think from a legal perspective that this is a reasonable restriction that will get upheld. So that's my prediction on that. And that's what sometimes people confuse is that not even your Fourth Amendment rights, which is a right to be free, people would say, from search and seizure. Well, no, it's to be free from unreasonable search and seizure, and there are certainly exceptions, et cetera. So, the right to keep and bear arms, the First Amendment right of speech, and all of those. And we know you can have
Can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
right. So all that. So getting to the second part of the question is that should 18-year-olds? There's no problem. I don't have a problem with 18-year-olds if they want to go to a gun range and be able to shoot. The problem is not 18-year-olds that have access to those guns to be able for recreational or sporting or hunting purposes, etc. The problem is 18-year-olds that go and kill a whole bunch of people. Is that of course that's the problem. So should an 18-year-old be able to, and in Cruz's case, be able to go down to a gun store and simply, the thing we have to remember there too is that his mother was an enabler. His mother helped him get that. His mother helped him get his state ID card, which allowed him to go down and to buy the guns that he bought and get the ammunition. At the end of the day, there is that if people want to get guns and commit crime, they're going to. Street crime and street guns are abundant out there. And if you can put a couple of bumps in the road to slow people down, to allow the system to work and for people to react, that's a good thing. And that's, what this requirement does. It keeps somebody who's young, like a Cruz, from being able to impulsively just go down and buy a firearm at a store. It's harder. You can do it to go out on the street and buy one. So really, these are just reasonable restrictions. But as far as somebody going to a shooting range or going hunting, and it doesn't prevent any of that. Even kids that are younger than 18, they can possess these guns, going hunting with parents or going to the range. They can do that. They just can't go buy them themselves and then act unilaterally. But nobody should mistake that it's foolproof because it's not. If somebody wants to get one and wreak havoc, they can do that, and they will do that. We see that time and again. So it's a very complicated issue, and it's really about reasonableness. And it's something that will always be debated because connecting the dots is what's important. If you want to really get to it, is that, like you said, is that there's so much missed with Cruz. I have never, and I started in this business a long time ago. It's hard to believe, in my 41st year in law enforcement. And I've never seen anybody get as much as far as services were concerned as Cruz. And there was a lot of attention paid to Cruz. There was failed attempts at threat assessments, but it's all failed. And so this guy had multiple treatment plans with private providers, school providers, community-based providers. There was an absolute disaster in an attempt at threat management. They didn't know what they were doing. There was no training. So all of this that was out there that somebody could have seen, should have seen, it just all fell through the cracks. That's why, but that goes to the state of school safety in 2018.
Talk about what, I want to go back to some of the changes the legislature approved, but can you talk about what changes we have made to school safety, what improvements we have made based on your commission's recommendations that now have have girded schools and students?
Yeah, so I would say, you got to divide all this into different groups and categories. And the first I would say is the intangible. The culture has changed. It was important that the culture change. And I can say across Florida's 4,000 schools, roughly, between charter schools and traditional public schools, and then there's private schools on top of that. But there is an emphasis on school safety. And it took a while. It took time. It took us really beating the drum and making the point. But I think that it has changed. Now, getting more into the tangible side is that physical site security is better today than it was in 2018. Is that we have single points of entry at schools. We have locked classroom doors. We have better video surveillance. We have in most classrooms throughout the state in Florida, we have what we call safe areas or hard corners. We have communications devices. We have the Alyssa's Alert Law, which is a panic button. So there are a lot more things in place that will allow people to more appropriately respond and react. That's the first thing you have to do is you have to assume, and anybody that doesn't operate from this premise is just flat out wrong, is that you cannot prevent this. It is going to happen again. It's a hard thing to say. People don't want to hear it. But the reality is it's going to happen again. The question is when and where. And the real question is, what are you doing differently today than you were doing yesterday to stop it as soon as it starts? If you don't operate from the position and the premise that it's going to happen again, and that was one of the big problems in Parkland is that people down there operated from the premise is one, it wasn't going to happen, and two, if it was going to happen, it's not going to happen in Parkland because
Right.
Parkland's safe. Remember, 2 days before the shooting, the Chamber of Commerce named Parkland the safest city in Florida. And it just shows it can happen anywhere, anytime. And I go back to it, and I'll keep saying it. Okay, everybody, do you not remember Columbine in 1999? And how many times is it happened since Columbine? How many times has it happened since Parkland? So it's going to happen again. The question is when and where, and it can happen in your community. So you have to be prepared. And that's why all of these things that we have in place now are aimed at stopping it as soon as it starts. And again, hard thing to say, but reality of it is that some of these things people don't like. Well, what I say to that is that it's not what you like. It's what can you live with. And I can't live with dead kids. So that's the premise. That's the lens that you need to view it through is not what you want in the perfect world, not what the way you would like it to be. But what can you live with to ensure that the schools, the students, the staff, et cetera, are safe? And some of those things are not ideal, but we don't live in an ideal world. And you have to be realistic that, again, it's going to happen. Now, once we talk about the things that will stop it as soon as it starts, because it's going to happen again, you want to stop it. Parkland, 3 minutes and 51 seconds, 34 people shot and or killed. Well, 1 or 2 is bad. But 1 or 2 is better than 34. So that's why you got to have all this in place. And probably the penultimate controversy is having armed people in the schools.
I was just going to ask you about that. The school
So the
guardian.
reality of that is, though, Dara, the reality of it is, go back to, it's not what you like. What can you live with?
You evolved on that, though. There was a point where you did not want non-law enforcement officers carrying guns on campuses. How did you get to the other side of that?
The facts, the reality of living it. I was in that building at that school. And when you walk through it and you watch the video and you see what happened in there and you start looking at everything that transpired and you realize that that's a big campus. There's 2,500 people on that campus, 45 acres. It's huge. And then you realize that the cops, and you start looking at response times. There's no way a cop is going to get there and going to get there soon enough to stop it. So you're going to have havoc. You're going to have hard word, carnage. It's true. That was carnage. And you're going to have it because somebody has to stop it as soon as it starts. And then we start looking at the data over time, over the years, from the Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center, from other data that's out there. And the majority of these school-based incidents are not, when they're stopped, they're not stopped by cops. They're stopped by school personnel. Why? Because they're there and they can stop it. So if we want to stop it, you got to have somebody that's there that can stop it. And the only way to stop somebody with a gun is somebody else with a gun to stop it. And look what happened to Chris Hickson. He went in, and Aaron Feist, and they were and they tried to, and they lost their lives trying to. They're heroes trying to stop this thing. But what are they going to stop it with?
Right.
And if a guy like Chris Hickson, who's a retired military veteran, a Navy guy, who, if he had a gun, he at least would have had a gun battle with Cruz.
Right.
But he didn't have anything. So Cruz executed him. It's terrible.
Yeah.
And so.
I mean, these were executions. I saw those videos.
Right.
They were executions.
Right. So this is just, so this is where, and say right now, the way it works under the law in Florida is that there has to be one armed good person with a gun on every school campus. And some districts don't, a lot of districts don't do more than that. Some have 2 in high schools, some have 1 in elementary schools, 1 in middle schools, and it varies. Now, some districts have authorized the Guardian program where they do have that force multiplier. But again, reality, and you got to look at it through the realistic lens, is that 2 is better than 1, 3 is better than 2, and 4 is better than 3. Nobody's saying that you need 50 or 60. Nobody's saying that if you don't want to do it, you should be forced to do it. But if you have former military personnel, former law enforcement personnel, people who are very proficient with firearms, they're sporting enthusiasts, and they feel comfortable do it and want to do it, and they want to go through the rigorous Guardian training. So the other thing you hear is, well, I don't want these people walking around who are coaches or teachers or principals or whoever who aren't trained. They get as much or more training on firearms than police recruits get in the police academy, and they have to qualify at a higher percentage than police recruits have to qualify in the police academy, and they got ongoing training. So I don't want to hear that they're not.
132 hours of training. I think
it's actually 144, but who's counting?
I'm sorry.
So
I think it's important for people to know, because that's a lot of hours.
Right, and a lot of it is firearms training, defensive tactics training, and those things, and they're there for one purpose. They're there for one purpose, and that is to stop these bad events from happening. They're not cops. They're not there for disturbances. They're not there to be SROs. They're not there. They're there for the worst day that happens on that campus and to stop it as soon as it starts. So why wouldn't you want to have that person there? If you operate from the premise, which you have to if you're being intellectually honest, then it's going to happen again. It's unpredictable as to where it's going to happen, but it's going to happen. And if it happens at your school, at the school your kids are at, you want somebody to stop it as soon as it starts. And the reality is that the cops aren't going to get there in time to start it before havoc is wreaked. So you want somebody there, and the only people there are going to be somebody with a gun that's going to stop it. So why wouldn't you want a force multiplier? Why do you want 1 or 2 on a campus with 2,500 or 3,000 students in a huge, they're not going to get from one side of it to the other. So, the reality again is that it's necessary, but people, are still not there across the board. And Florida law is that in order to have the Guardian program, it has to be authorized by the sheriff of the county and by the school board. And so, like here in Pinellas, is that I've authorized it, and we use guardians, uniform guardians in the elementary schools, but the school board won't authorize it for their personnel. So there is a void of having that force multiplier, and a lot of districts are in that position. And all I'll say to that is that they haven't accepted reality. They haven't lived this. They haven't looked at the facts and looked at it. And they're not operating from the premise of what they can live with. They're operating from the premise of what they can like, or in some cases, which I think is even worse, is political ideology, and taking this anti-gun approach. And so, I evolved on it, absolutely, because my position changed on it because my initial reaction to it was it was an uninformed reaction. But once I looked at the facts and looked at the evidence and walked those hallways and saw the video and then looked at the data and looked at it, it really becomes crystal clear as to what you need.
Hang tight. We'll be right back with Sheriff Bob Gualtieri.
Here at Deeper Dive, we want to hear from you, the listeners. We invite you to send your questions, comments, and feedback to our mailbag. You can reach us at deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. That's deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. Get your 2 cents in by sending us an email.
Welcome back to A Deeper Dive with Dara. One of the other controversial items that came out, and I forget if it was in that year or if it was the following year, was the red flag laws, which I believe, I don't have the data in front of me, I apologize, but I believe have been used many times in Florida and seems to be a very successful method of taking guns away or weapons away from people temporarily when they're in crisis, I think is a fair way to word it. How can you tell me how, that is something that I think law enforcement has been wanting for a while. That's still controversial among Second Amendment proponents, it's like my cold dead hands kind of a thing. So how successful has that been, do you think, in preventing, you and I have spoken, and I think you've told me, like, you are 100% certain that you have saved lives through this. How successful has that change to the law been?
It's been extremely successful. One of the things that you measure what the legislature does by how many times after they enact something does it go back and get tweaked or changed. And it happens, a lot. Sometimes, the legislature just doesn't get it right the first time. But I can tell you that the Florida legislature absolutely got it right in 2018. And the front-loaded work that they put into Senate Bill 7040 when they created this, it hasn't been changed because they got it right and it works. And across Florida, there's been probably around 9,000 risk protection orders or red flag orders entered, as they're called. The 2 counties, and this should tell people something, the 2 counties that lead the state in the use of these red flag laws are Pinellas County and Polk County.
Right, you and Sheriff Grady Judd.
Right, and Sheriff Judd is also on the Stoneman Douglas Commission.
Yes.
So, I say in law enforcement, we call that a clue, right? As to why. Okay, so the 2 of us that have seen this,
Yeah.
our counties are using them most extensively because they absolutely work. Now, the opponents to these, again, spin it and misconstrue it and get people all worked up about what they say it is when it's not. And importantly is that there's a lot of process and a lot of due process before anybody loses the right for a period of time to possess firearms or ammunition or be able to buy a firearm. It's important that we put these bumps in the road and keep people from potentially hurting someone else when they've acted in a certain way. So they have to demonstrate that they are a danger to themselves or others. And there's a whole series of reviews before it even gets to a judge. And then when the judge makes a determination, there's an initial order that's entered, and it's good for 14 days. At the 14-day mark, then they come back for a full hearing, which is really a trial. And a person can put on evidence, and they can be represented by a lawyer, and a judge hears the entire case and makes a determination. And at the end of it, whether it's the initial or whether it's on what we call a final order, which makes the order good for a year, is that here's something that the opponents of this just totally spin out of control and misstate what it is. There is no provision in Florida law for the red flag orders for law enforcement to go take anybody's gun.
Right.
So law enforcement's running around taking people's guns. No, we're not. And we've done in Pinellas County probably now, probably 1,600 of them or so. And what the law says is that when the judge issues the order, the person has to divest themselves because they are a danger to others. They've threatened, they've done something that's bad to themselves, against themselves or others, and they shouldn't have a firearm with ammunition, and that they have to divest themselves of it. Now they have an option within a reasonable amount of time, and that's not 2 minutes and hours, day, whatever, a reasonable amount of time. And there has to be a compliance hearing within 48 hours. That means they gave it to somebody else. They could give it to a next door neighbor. They could give it to a cousin across town. They could give it to somebody else. They just can't possess it. And if they want to, they can give it to law enforcement and we'll hold on to it for them. So if we find that the person has guns, they haven't divested themselves of it, they can give it to us or they can give it to somebody else, and they still have it and they're refusing, then we can go back to a judge and we can get a search warrant if we have probable cause they still have that. So since 2018, in the 1,600 plus, 1,800, somewhere in that range of RPOs, risk protection orders that we've done, we've had to go back to a judge and get a search warrant one time.
Wow.
So there's no going out seizing people's guns, and
Great.
that people can go back to the court. So if
Yes.
if the judge issues the order and circumstances have changed within that year period of time, they can go back to a judge and say, Judge, look, this is what I did. You entered an order saying I can't have the guns and ammunition I can't buy, but I got on the right side of this. I fixed it. It isn't a problem anymore. And ask the judge to vacate the order, and the judge can do that. So this is all about safety. It's not about depriving people of Second Amendment rights. And there isn't a person that a court, again, a judge, they talk about judges and neutral and detached magistrates and all these, and the importance of due process. There's a ton of due process. And the judge is looking at this and making a determination as to whether the high burden has been met. And if it has, in the interest of public safety, we just say that you shouldn't be having a gun right now. And what I hear all the time from the gun advocates is that they agree that people that have serious mental health issues or that have engaged in threats or have engaged in bad, that they don't want them having guns. So what's their issue with the red flag orders? Because they're not just willy-nilly. They're not just because somebody got a whim and decided to take somebody's guns. And that's the way some of these people cast it. It's not. It's a very responsible process that is very productive. And and I can tell you with certainty from cases that we have investigated and obtained the red flag orders in, that we have kept harm from happening. Those cases don't get the headlines, but isn't that the goal? Is that y'all want us to do things that you don't hear about. And that, prevention doesn't get, 1A on the front page of the paper. And that's a good thing. Is that what I should tell you about, and what people should be most interested in, is not about the arrests that we've made, not about the cases we've solved, but about the crime that didn't happen because of what we did. And these red flag orders keep us on that path of preventing these things.
Well, that I thank you for that thoughtful explanation. Just finishing up on MSD and in the commission, what do you think was the biggest, and the changes to the law, what do you think was the biggest, and you mentioned a bunch of different factors that played into what happened and what we are doing differently today. What do you think was the biggest takeaway, the biggest, what the biggest, was there an aha moment? Was there this is the thing that we really need to fix if we want to reduce the chances of this from happening again? Or was it just there were just so many pressure points that we need to wrangle them all in order to make our system safer?
So let me answer that kind of two-part. One, with the things that we've already talked about. I think the aha moment for me was probably halfway through 2018 as we were hearing about all this and trying to frame all of it. And what I realized and what broke down is, in order for this to be successful, you have to be able to identify a threat. And remember that there was an employee that saw Nicholas Cruz walking through the gate carrying the AR-15 and recognized it as a rifle bag, and he didn't do anything about it. So first, you got to identify the threat. Well, in that case, they did identify the threat. Second, you have to be able to communicate the threat to others. And the third is people have to be able to react to the threat. So that's the methodology, is identify the threat, communicate the threat, react to the threat. So, and then you got to have all the other stuff in place, like the Alyssa's alert panic button. So that goes to communicating the threat. Identifying it goes to having people stationed at gates when they're open, having single points of entry, etc. And then people being able to react to it. And that goes to locked classroom doors, and it goes to the safe areas or the hard corners in classrooms, etc. So bringing all that together was this kind of illuminating point of that's the recipe. That's what you have to have. Now, it's a lot more complicated than that, but that's what you got to have. Identification of the threat, communication of the threat, reaction to the threat. Now, the second part of your question is that, to keep it from happening. None of that stuff, none of it is going to keep it from happening. Right. That's to mitigate the harm. The greatest opportunity, unequivocally, and we're still not there, we're working on it, and it needs to be improved, to prevent, which is what we want, which we strive for, and we should strive for, we should talk about it, but we're never going to get there on it because you can't, is through threat management. And so threat management is a concept of looking at behaviors, looking at statements, and looking at indicators at the earliest possible time. And then before anything becomes actionable, the standard model that law enforcement has operated under is to do something about something. So what do cops do traditionally is that cops will remove the person from the situation. That usually means the problematic person is removed because of an arrest or a Baker Act or something where some type of enforcement action is taken and the person is charged, or again, an involuntary mental health commitment, something along those lines. But if the goal is to keep it from becoming actionable, then we got to intervene early. But when you don't have effective threat management and you're not looking at it that way, then we go out, we look, we get information, the schools do, we investigate. Well, I can't Baker Act, I can't make an arrest, so there's nothing I can do. And you just leave the person there. And then you get called again when the person is back into a crisis situation, you do the same thing. Well, finally, 3 or 4 times it gets bad enough. When it gets bad enough, then we act. Well, what are we doing? Why are we waiting for it to get bad enough before we act? So threat management is a concept where you recognize that there is no checklist. There's no predictive set of indicators, but there's a thing called a pathway to violence. And the pathway to violence is beginning at one place and the end culminates in the violence. And that anywhere along that pathway is that you can disrupt that pathway to violence and take somebody off that pathway to violence through intervention. And it's behaviors, and it usually begins with some sort of a grievance. Is that this is where you have workplace violence, you have school violence, you have violence, there's a grievance of some sort. Somebody lost their job, somebody didn't get a class they wanted, or in Cruz's case, he felt bullied, those kinds of things. And then they begin probing, and there's certain things that happen, and recognizing all of that and saying, when we're starting to see these things, let's jump in way back at the earliest possible stage, and let's try and keep it from progressing. So we're not doing, and that's another impact of the 2018 law, is that there has to be a threat management team on every school campus. Well, they're there, okay, but they're not acting as robustly as they need to. I think you're going to see in this year coming out of the legislature, I think you're going to see another school safety bill that will work to improve threat management. We talked about it at the most recent Stoneman Douglas Commission meeting in November of 22. Mm-hmm. They had a lot of recommendations on it. So I think that one aspect of it is prevention and really trying to do the unattainable, but you can stop some of it, make no mistake, if you do it the right way. And that's through threat management. And then while you're working at that, then you've got the other side, which is the tangible side and mitigating the harm. We have made great progress on that side, as I've talked about. But where we still have a lot of room is on the threat management side. And we need to do better, and we need to do more of that. So we're working on that right now. That's my focus right now, is to get threat management to a better place.
So you mentioned that might be something that the threat management issue is something that the legislature might address during this upcoming session, which starts in March. One of the other things that the legislature is certain to pass and the governor is certain to sign is a permitless carry legislation. You will not have to have a permit issued by the state in order to carry a gun on you. That used to be called concealed carry. We have over 2 million of those licenses or permits in Florida today. This has been something that the sheriffs and law enforcement have opposed for many years. No, no.
Well, I think what we opposed and still oppose, I know I do, and I know
Right.
that the majority of the sheriffs do, is open carry.
Okay. All right.
So
I'm sorry.
very different. And what
Okay.
in 2015, 16 is, you'll recall, I spent a
My
lot
bad.
of time
Okay.
in Tallahassee, fighting on that one.
Yes.
It was being pushed very hard, and I still oppose. There's a big difference between open carry and permitless carry.
Okay. And so, but the Sheriff's Association is supporting the permitless carry. Are you personally in support of
Yes.
that? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So I'll tell you just quickly. Here's why.
Sure.
Is that I've never met somebody that is getting ready to go and carjack somebody, going to rob a store, break into a house, says, "Wait a minute, let me run down and get my permit first."
Right.
It doesn't work that way. So they use crime guns, and they get guns on the street, and they tuck them in their waistband or whatever they're going to do, and they go commit their crime. So to think that requiring a permit has anything to do with that is just not the case. Second is, so what I look at all laws through the lens of what does the law accomplish? How does the law make us safer? What's the purpose of the law? Well, if the purpose of, and again, has nothing to do, Darren, this is important, has nothing to do with who buys a gun. Has nothing to do with who gets a gun, who possesses a gun, has nothing to do with any of that. So there's not one more gun put on the street or put in people's hands. It has nothing to do with waiting periods. It has nothing to do with any of that. It has to do with purely, can you carry concealed or not? So what's the purpose? Again, if somebody's engaged in criminal activity, criminals don't follow the law. And so to say that there's a law against carrying concealed without a permit hasn't stopped one criminal that I've come in contact with in 40 plus years, because they do it. So what's the second thing? Well, is that there's a background check. Well, a background check on who? Criminals don't follow the law anyway. And so there's still background checks on gun purchases. It doesn't affect that. And it has all the disqualifications. And if you're a law-abiding person, whether you could get a permit or whether you could carry concealed, if you're a law-abiding person, you're going to follow the law. So if you're a convicted felon, you've got a domestic violence injunction against you, you have been declared mentally incompetent, all those whole list of things that disqualify you still disqualify you from carrying concealed. So we're not doing anything different there. And the third thing is, which is the most misunderstood and often used as the reason for it, is, quote, that, well, they get training. No, they don't. Is that the training that is given, and go online, is that I challenge anybody, go online right now and Google it. You'll find that you can pay $50 to a company in Las Vegas, Nevada, online to do your couple hours of online in Las Vegas concealed carry training that will allow you to go and get a permit in Florida. And then they say, well, you have to have live fire training. No, you don't. Is you show up at a hotel out off of 301 in Plant City, and they have a barrel in the back, and you take a 22 and you fire the round one time, and that's it.
Wow. I had
So
no
there is
idea
no
about
training.
that. I had
Yes.
no idea about that.
Right. So this is what I'm saying
So
is
it's like a
that,
veiled process.
right. So people say, oh my God, we're going to have all these people walking around. There's going to be more guns on the street. You're going to have untrained people. You're going to have people unvetted, et cetera. No, you're not, because it's not how it works. And the last part of it is what really concerns me the most. And I hear a lot of people talking about concern about, well, using analogies. Well, you have to have a driver's license to drive a car, and you have to have a pilot's license. That's not the same thing as this. And especially because it's not working that way. Is that seriously, you can do the training online, and there are a ton of these places out there where you fire one round through a gun. That's not training. So what are we doing? So if you're sitting at home on a Friday night and you have a gun, and for whatever reason, you feel like you need to be safe, and you're going down to the store, and you're me or you or your next door neighbor, and that person wants to put their gun in their pocket just for personal safety as they go down to the store, what's the harm in that? Because the bad guy is going to do it. And if you want to do it, why should you have to have a $97 permit? And what's been accomplished by requiring you have that permit? So I don't have a problem with it, as I don't think we're accomplishing anything with the law. Now, open carry, that's a totally different situation. Right. And I still very much and adamantly oppose it for a whole host of reasons, but that's not on the table right now.
Okay. Well, I stand corrected, but thank you for that. And my last question is another sort of an odd tangent that came out of this horrible massacre. Surprisingly to many, and I am sure that you feel passionate about this, Nicholas Cruz, a jury did not sentence Nicholas Cruz to the death penalty. I've been covering the death penalty for a long time. You and I chatted quite a bit about this when the law was changed after a Supreme Court ruling to require unanimity in death sentences. I've witnessed executions. This is something that we all as a society take very seriously. The governor, the families, what was your response to that? I think it was one juror not wanting the death penalty for him.
Yeah. So here's my reaction to it. I think, unfortunately and sadly, I think the legal system, the criminal justice system, got scammed by that juror.
Got scammed.
Yep. Because there's no way that you could sit through that trial and watch all that testimony, hear all of what was said, look at all the evidence, and not come to the conclusion that under applicable law, because that's what jurors are supposed to do, apply the facts to the law to the facts, and come to the right result. There's no way you come to that result. And I know more than most about what they claim were the mitigating factors with Cruz. I've seen his mental health records. I've been through them. I get it all. That guy planned in detail, made self videos. He knew exactly what he was going to do. He knew exactly what he was doing. This didn't have anything to do with his crack cocaine addicted birth mother, 18 years before. It had nothing to do with that. And so this, to me, came down to a juror who scammed the system. They came in and said one thing and did another. And
was probably opposed to the death penalty from the get-go, but didn't.
Right. That's what I mean. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It came in a self-serving way, scammed the system, and said one thing and did another. So, they have to be able to, pass in the questions that are posed to potential jurors, whether they will impose the death penalty if the state meets its burden. And this person obviously said yes, and then didn't do it. So it's terrible. It is absolutely terrible. And so I support the bill that's pending in the legislature
8-2,
now.
Right? It's 8-2, I think. No, not 8-4. Right? 8-2. Where did that come from? That's new math, Sheriff.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
8-4. There was talk about 10-2 back in the day when they changed the law, but you think 8-4 is reasonable?
Yeah, I do. I think 8-4 is fine. Again, because there's still the burden is there. You still have to have unanimity, unanimous as far as the aggravating factors are concerned. That still has to be unanimous, that the factors exist. And so once you decide unanimously the factors exist, then the ultimate, and it's a recommendation, and then you still have a judge that plays a role, and the judge makes the final decision. So I think there's a lot of steps, and of course, there's an automatic appeal to the Florida Supreme Court. So there was a lot of due process, a lot of steps, as there should be. But what we've seen here is that you can't have the eggs that are all in one basket. You can't have it resting. And I'd suggest 2 people is still a problem. To be able to have, in order to have a situation where you're going to have 4 people, 4 that are going to come in and say one thing and do another, scam the system. That's probably not going to happen. 1, we already saw it. 2 is, you might have it, but 4, you're not going to have that. So I think it's a reasonable number. I think it's a good number, and because of everything that's in the backdrop of what I just said, I think there's a lot of protections in place, and I support it. We can't ever have that happen again.
Is there anything that you'd like to, any final remarks about this, marking this 5th year anniversary since MSD that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Don't forget, and don't let those lives that were lost be for naught, and don't do what we as a culture have a tendency to do, is as time passes, is that the significance and the importance dissipates. We have to keep our foot on the gas pedal, and there's nothing more important than the safety of our kids. And every parent's expectation must be met, that when they say goodbye to their kids in the morning, that they're coming home safe in the afternoon. And people shouldn't forget that.
Sheriff Bob Gualtieri, Sheriff of Pinellas County, thank you so much for your time, and it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. I can't wait to have you back again.
Thank you.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is a podcast by City and State Florida, hosted by Dara Cam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs LLC and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.